Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the Market Values podcast, Transfermarkt's weekly show that takes a look at the biggest stories around the world of football and how that impacts the market values of the biggest stars across the sport. As ever, I'm joined by my co-host, Manu Vet. Manu, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. It's been a busy week and it's going to be an even busier week with the Champions League games, but yeah, doing really good.
Yeah, we are wrapping up this week's show just before Tuesday's clash between Bayern Munich and PSG. But we've got so much to talk about on this show before the Champions League even hit our docket. We go to England, where we sit down with Ben Littlemore, our Premier League market value analyzer, and discuss 5 players who could, in fact, should see their market values increase in the next Premier League market value update at the start of June. We then go to France and speak to our France area manager, Ronan Caroff, about 3 really exciting players at Lens who have really propelled them into a Ligue title challenge. 3 really excited players there who might not be there next season, so definitely stay tuned for that, and then you can tell your friends that you know all about these guys when they move to Newcastle or AC Milan or whatever else. And then we also go to Italy, Manu, where you sit down with our colleague Marius Soika, our Italian football expert, on the show, and he had a lot to say as well, didn't he?
Yeah, he had a lot to say and celebrate because, obviously he's a Parma fan, so his team got to stay up. But we did not talk about Parma. We talked about Kenan Yildiz, the Juventus winger, and his development, which has been incredible to watch. And we are both analyzing his current market value and speculating where it could go and where he might go as well.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're listening to this on Spotify or YouTube, and you can obviously watch it in video form in both those platforms, it's worth sticking on the video just for that section to see the really cool Palmer top that Marius has on throughout that section. Very, very nice addition to this week's show. But Manu, since the show is about Italian football, French football and English football this week, we thought we'd use this intro to dive into the Bundesliga market value forum and try and level the playing field a little bit, give German football a bit of love. We do work for a German company after all. It seems only fair. And as we are at lengths to go, we go to great lengths every week to kind of explain to users, you can comment and vote on what you think the market values of any player should be in our market value forums on Transfermarkt. And Manu, we've picked out 3 interesting case studies from the German top flight this week. And I'm going to jump straight into the first one, and that is Said El-Mala, the Cologne winger. He currently has a market value of 35 million euros, 19-year-old left winger, really kind of came out of nowhere for FC Cologne this year. The average suggestion from users is that his market value should go up to 43.6 million euros. We obviously don't tend to work in decimals when it gets to that stage, but that's obviously the average from all the user votes. And there's a really interesting discussion in the forum where people were basically debating how much FC Cologne could get for him. One user says they're holding out for 50 million euros. Another user suggests Brighton, who have been heavily linked with him and obviously have a history of swooping in and picking up exciting young talents in the Bundesliga, are only prepared to pay 35 million euros with a standard 15% sell-on clause, which apparently is the classic move from Brighton. But let's jump into it. What do we think? Do you agree with one user that he should be 50 million euros, or do you think he's perfectly fine at 35 million euros?
I mean, he's an interesting case, isn't he? Because his entire season with Köln has been about. I mean, the entire season of Köln has been about him and how to use him right, and the discussions about him. Yeah, I have not seen a player discussed this much at 1. FC Köln since Lukas Podolski, former Bayern and Arsenal striker as well, right? Having that much discourse, and he's an exciting young star whose statistics, 11 goals and 5 assists in 31 Bundesliga games, are quite outstanding, especially for a team that's been fighting relegation all season long. And considering that he's a teenager, and I think where I'm a little bit concerned maybe about his evaluation, at early in the season when he first burst onto the scene, there was talk about 100 million euros, 70 million euros, those kind of numbers. The problem I have with his evaluation, and why I'm a bit worried that it might be too high, or might go too high, is because Köln don't have a strong history of selling players for big fees. And there's also a real danger that players at a young age, they have this feeling or urgency that they need to make another move to go to another club, to a new environment that isn't necessarily made or built for them. Premier League teams are notorious for spending lots of money on lots of players and have the financial ability to fix costly mistakes quickly by making more purchases. Or even if they don't necessarily make a mistake, but signing a player that doesn't 100% fit them, just discard them. Brian Gruder comes to mind, who went from Mainz to Leipzig a little bit too early, to Brighton a little bit too early in my mind, and then has come back to Germany since, and in a different environment is doing quite well in Leipzig, right? Because he's back in Germany, he's playing for a coach who believes in him and has a plan for him. Leipzig had clearly had a plan to play him. And that is where the evaluation, especially when Premier League teams are involved, can jump up too high. And that is my worries. And I actually feel quite comfortable where he's at, considering that he's only had one Bundesliga season under his belt. Like, I mean, in an ideal world, he'd play there for another year and confirm that evaluation, maybe make the World Cup squad. That can change a lot of things as well. But I think 35 million, maybe 40 million is probably pretty fair, Stefan.
Yeah, you basically took the words right out of my mouth. I have Brian Gruder's profile open in front of me because I was just double checking what he did leave Mainz for. And you're right, it's 31.5 million euros. And I think they're very, very similar cases. And especially in the sense that, as you said, I don't think Said El-Mala is by any means a finished article. I think he's obviously like a rookie, if you want to use the kind of American expression, or, he's still learning his trade for sure. He's not even really a undistinguishable or undisputed starter for FC Cologne. He's not an undisputed performer for them yet. So I'd be very surprised, even if Brighton are prepared to make an offer for him, pick him up, and to even kind of look beyond the fact that things didn't quite work out for Gruder. I think they'd be well aware of the fact that this guy's not anywhere near ready for the Premier League, because arguably he's not even quite ready for the Bundesliga yet. So I don't foresee Brighton going out and spending 32, 35 million euros on him, unless they're really prepared to go long term and say, right, we'll send him back to FC Cologne for a couple of years and see how he gets on, which admittedly is maybe what they have done with Gruder, to an extent. But I think 50 million euros is very, very optimistic, shall I say. You never know with these things. Worse players have gone for more money, and if it turns into a kind of bidding more this summer, then he certainly could go for more. But I think I tend to agree. I think about 35 million euros tends to make a lot of sense for El-Mala right now. I'll move swiftly on to the next player, unless you've got any final points, or shall we move on?
No. I think we can go on to whoever is next.
The next one is Julian Ryerson, the Norwegian international and Dortmund right back. And this comment from one user really got me going. He said, this guy's a fast bowler with 12 assists and more than 40 caps for his national team. Fast bowler, is that a baseball term?
Whew.
Hockey, maybe?
No, definitely not. Hockey fast bowler.
Yeah, maybe it's like a German term that's been translated.
Knowing how German has evolved in the last few years, this could also be a German using an English term, not using it correctly.
Right, yeah, for sure. Anyway, Ryerson has a current market value of 25 million euros, and the average suggestion for what his market value should be is 33.5 million euros, which I think is quite interesting. That user obviously said, this he's flying. I think he recently broke a record for the most assists for a fullback in the Bundesliga ever. Another user says, he's been linked with moves to Barcelona, Man United, Newcastle. A transfer fee of 30 million euros would be absolutely fair. And then, interestingly, some other users kind of push back Manu and say, well, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. He is, 28, a very decent performer for Dortmund, but by no means a kind of standout star, perhaps. And maybe is currently what he should be. But a really interesting debate in the forum. So obviously, people listening to the show or watching the show can go jump in and give their points of view. But I mean, what do we think about Ryerson? Market value 25 million euros. He's The 9th most valuable player at Dortmund, 6th most valuable player in Norway. He's the 21st most valuable right back in the world. Yeah, I mean, what do we think? Do you think he should go up? Should he go down? Do you think 25 makes sense?
Well, he went from, he had an update, right? From 20 to 25 million, which catapulted him into all these categories that you listed. Right backs or wing backs is an odd position these days because, you look at currently at Bayern Munich, a former midfielder is playing as a world-class right back in the form of Konrad Laimer. And so, it is a position that is changing, and it is a position that you can drop in players depending on what role you want them to play. And the way Dortmund play too really favors his numbers. This is a club where Kevin Großkreuz was a world-class wingback for a few years, and he finished his career out, I think, in the 6th or 7th division in German football. So it is a position that can be elusive. I've talked to agents actually about this, that wingbacks are always the hardest players to move because there's a lot of them. And they're also the easiest position to replace at a pinch. Like if you don't have a top wingback in your team, you can just put someone else there and you're probably going to be okay. I mean, there's been teams that have won World Cups without wingbacks, right? So, I think his evaluation is probably pretty fair. And at the age of 28, he's turning 29 next season. That is when we actually start looking at bringing values down.
Yeah. Do you know what? I'm actually going to disagree slightly because I was just looking there at the average fee for right backs recently, and I'll rhyme off some numbers for you. Jeremy Frimpong is actually the one that stood out to me a lot. 40 million euros. He went from Bayer Leverkusen to Liverpool last season. Even like Mateus Nunes, who I know is a very decent player for Manchester City, a very useful player for them, but he went for 62 million euros when Man City were in a pinch and needed a right back. Nelson Semedo, 36 million euros to Barcelona. Mats Wiefer went to Brighton for 32 million euros. Sasha Bowie to Bayern for 30 million euros, probably one of the biggest flops in their history for sure. I think you're right in saying that the overall stock of fullbacks is always tend to be quite high, but I think in this current climate, I think a good right back is worth his weight gold. And I'm looking at the players linked with Ryerson. Manchester United are in desperate need of a right back this season. I think Barcelona desperately need one as well. Newcastle do have Livramento, but he sometimes has to help out on the left. And Kieran Trippier's moving on as well. He's not very young, so they'll have to pick up another fullback for sure. So you talk about 3 very rich clubs in need of a ready-made fullback that they can rely upon. And so I actually think if Ryerson was to leave Dortmund this year, I actually think they would be pushing above 30 million euros just because he's proven himself as a very, very capable player in the Bundesliga and the Champions League. So I'm actually going to agree with some of the more optimistic users here and say I think he should be at least 30 million euros. So I would hope, and it's a shame enough to Tobias on the show this week, and I could harass him about it and badger him to do so. But I think Ryerson should go up to 30 million euros in the next market value update. And then, as you said, when he hits 29 and 30, we can maybe start looking at winding it down. But I think Ryerson deserves a bit more time in the limelight.
Fair enough. That update is before the World Cup. It's actually coming up pretty soon. So we'll see. Let's see what happens. We haven't even discussed the fact that he could win the World Cup with Norway as well. There we go. But we'll cross that bridge when it comes, perhaps. With Erling Haaland up front, why not?
Exactly. Oh, I'm sure he'll get at least 1 or 2 assists for Haaland this summer. Anyway, the last player on this list is Can Uzun. And Manu, this is a really interesting one. 20-year-old Turkish attacking midfielder burst onto the scene for Eintracht Frankfurt, a club who are experts at developing, in particular, attacking talents and selling them usually to the Premier League for a lot of money. And 12 months ago, this guy looked like he was going to be the next Kai Havertz, the next Mario Götze, whatever you want to refer to him as. He's currently got a market value of 45 million euros. And the interesting thing is the discussion in the market value forum is typically about people saying his market value should go down. So far this season, he's got 8 goals and 6 assists in just 25 games. He's currently the most valuable player at Frankfurt, the third most valuable Turkish international in the world. And he is currently the 13th most valuable player in the Bundesliga. And yeah, there's quite a lot of chat. Danny Carvajal, user's name, I don't think it's the real Danny Carvajal, but of course, if I'm being honest, it wouldn't surprise me if it was. He's like, how can Can Uzun be 45 million euros? He had such a good start, but after that, partly due to injuries, he hasn't achieved much. And then some other user says, Uzun isn't valued at 45 just because of the start of the season. Must forget, despite his age, he scored 6 goals in 20 league games last season, so he's no flash in the pan. Day Walker says, I do tend to think his market value is currently a bit too high. If nothing changes by the summer, I don't think there would be any avoided drop in value despite his strong scoring record. This should of course be moderate, but I currently don't see any clubs handing over 45 million euros for Uzun despite his status as a talented and good player. And the conversation goes on and on and on, and as I said, people can jump in there and, as they listen to the show and give their thoughts, but the average suggestion for what his market value should be now is just under 35 million euros. So most users saying his market value should drop by 10 million euros. Manu, he's obviously had a very difficult season. Frankfurt in general have had a very difficult season. They've obviously had a huge amount of turnover in terms of players. The manager got sacked, and then of course Uzun has had 2 or 3 injuries which have really kind of upset his season. So it's an interesting conundrum because we're not just talking about a young player going from nothing to from zero to hero. We're not talking about a senior player with one last hurrah or one big transfer fee left in him. We're talking about a young player who's had a few bumps in the road, and we're trying to evaluate where he is at this point in his career.
Yeah, I mean, he started the season so well, right? He scored 5 goals in his first 5 games, and he looked like the next big Eintracht Frankfurt shooting star. We were already talking, similar to Said Al-Mala, we're talking 90 million euros, 100 million euros. He's going to be the next Ekitike and get a huge transfer fee for the club. And then injuries hit. And I think that is really where things got derailed the most. He's been now fit again. He's been playing he played 88 minutes on the weekend against Augsburg and got an assist. His first full game back after a long injury break where he played the full length, 88 minutes, pretty much the full length, and actually, got something in terms of production. We're always very careful when it comes to young players to downgrade them because all that needs to happen is for him to hit another 3 or 4 games where he scores 5 to 6 goals, and then the discussion of it switches very quickly, and then you see his potential. And look, with Can Uzun, late in the show, I'm talking about Yildiz, his national team compatriot, right? And the development that he has undergone, the numbers aren't that far off. Of course, he's doing it in Serie A. Can Uzun is doing in Bundesliga, which is a bit more high scoring, but the numbers aren't that far off, and that is with an injury as well. So I be careful with a downgrade based on the fact that he's still very young and that the conversation could switch really quickly. And he's also going to be at the World Cup, right? We would look foolish if we downgrade him and then he scores 4 or 5 goals at the World Cup, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, you downgraded him. You didn't really show foresight there, did you? So just to offer a little bit insight on how this works when we approach these things. I do market values myself for North America, right? So I have a little bit of insight, but with young players, you have to sometimes be careful.
Yeah, for sure. And as you said, if a Chelsea, a Barcelona, a Real Madrid, whoever comes along and says we want to sign this guy, they're going to be looking at what he has done on the pitch, not what he hasn't done off the pitch with his injuries. And just looking at the rest of the season, got 3 more games, man. He's got Hamburg, he's got Dortmund, and he's got Stuttgart. 3 really big games from a Bundesliga point of view. 3 big clubs with huge support. And if he can perform in those games, it's something everyone in Germany will definitely take notice of. So 3 good stages, perhaps, to kind of show he's still got it and maybe fight off any potential market value drops. But we'll have to see what happens when the next market value update comes out for the Bundesliga, which won't be far off. But as we've been saying, if you guys want to get involved in these conversations, if you want to vote and tell us what you think these players' market value should be, head to Transfermarkt, head to Forum, and then head to Market Value Discussions. And from there, you can filter by league, you can filter by nationality, filter by club, or you can just search for the player you're looking for in the search bar, and it will all pop up there. But Manu, I think we've probably held off long enough, and I think we should probably head to France and chat to Rono and find out what's going on at Lens and whether they could win the Ligue 1 title this season.
Oh la la.
While PSG are desperately looking to hold on to their European title and win another Champions League this season, there is a somewhat unlikely contender in Ligue 1 who are pushing them all the way for the league title, and that is, of course, Lens. And to talk more about that on this week's show, I'm delighted to have Ronan Caroff back on the show. He's our area manager for France, and he was actually at their recent game against Stade Brest on Friday, which was, of course, a 3-3 draw. Ronald, great to have you back on the show. And how was the match?
Hi, Stefan. I'm glad to be back. And yes, indeed, it was a great game. Lens was led 3-0 at halftime, and they managed a really great comeback to at least save 1 point. Maybe it's getting too far, PSG now in front of them, but it still shows a great spirit from that team. So there is a lot to talk about them, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Even if they could only finish second, there's still a huge achievement. And actually, there's three players in particular we wanted to touch on because they have been flying up the leaderboard, if you will, in Ligue 1 in terms of which players have gained the most market value. So I'm going to try and go through them one by one. I'm going to start at the back and work my way forward. And we're going to start in goals with Robin Risser. I did ask you before we started recording about pronunciations, but as a Scotsman, I will butcher French names in particular, so please interrupt me if I do. But really interesting goalkeeper here, Rono, because he was signed from Strasbourg for €3 million at the start of the season. His market value has increased by 23.5 million this season to €25 million. Ninth in Ligue 1 amongst all players for the biggest market value increases. First among all goalkeepers for the biggest market value increases. And perhaps the most interesting thing, particularly for Premier League fans or Chelsea fans listening to this week's show, is that he leaves Strasbourg, who are, of course, the sister club of Chelsea. Chelsea desperately looking for goalkeepers. They've let him go, and what's happened is Mike Penders, who stayed at Strasbourg, is second to him in terms of market value increases this year. Penders has apparently done okay. Market value increased by €10 million, but the player they let go and go to Lens has more or less overshadowed him this season. And as far as I can tell from the market values, has been one of the best goalkeepers this season in Ligue 1.
Yes, indeed. I think it's quite frustrating for the fans in Strasbourg because he was one of the biggest prospects in the academy for the past few years. He got 2 consecutive loans in Dijon and then Red Star near Paris, and he got to show his ability in slightly smaller clubs. But then last summer we see Petrovic go back to Chelsea and then be sold, so the window was open to get better chances as possible number 1 for Strasbourg, but they went for one of another Chelsea's assets, Mike Penders, so that opened the window for a transfer that wasn't even expensive, like 3 million, even if it's a decent prospect. He didn't have that much pro games yet, so that was like a really good bargain for Lens, even if it's also kind of a bet because he didn't have any Liga experience as a starter, but we quickly saw that his potential was well analyzed and overall a quite good fit for Lens, who needed to rebuild a lot of their team after a quite frustrating 24-25 season. So it was not that much of a surprise to see him live to the hype in a way, but to reach this type of heights from going for, like you said, from 1.5 million market value when he joined Lens to right now 25 million, and some talks about possibly going to the World Cup with France because there is a bit of, say, turmoil in French national team for goalkeepers, as we see Lucas Chevalier struggle with PSG and a few other players knocking on the door of the team to possibly get a chance for this biggest stage. So I think it's probably one of the biggest revelations of French football overall, actually, for a player like Risser. But I think also he will get quite a big transfer topic for the next summer because, like you said, Chelsea could have an eye on him if they decide to get a fresh start in the goalkeeper department. And we also saw some rumors for other Premier League clubs. We have Brighton, there is Newcastle also, who got some requirements on Risser. So I think it will be quite a huge topic in this summer. And for him or a few other Lens players, I think it will just be a matter of if he prefers to aim directly to a bigger stage, bigger club, or try to play the Champions League, because Lens is almost secure, I would say, for second place now. So that will be a direct qualification for Champions League, and that would be quite a good scene to play on and make sure that this great season from Lens wasn't just a one and done situation, that they can really build on it for 26-27.
Yeah, it'd be an interesting twist of fate or even irony if he did end up at Chelsea next season after everything that's happened at Strasbourg. As you said, potentially going to the World Cup with France, depending on who Didier Deschamps picks for his squad. And even if he doesn't go to the World Cup, as you said, potentially playing in the Champions League next season or earning a big move in the summer. So either way we look at it, Rono, it seems as though his market value is only going to increase in 2026.
I think that will be the logic, yeah, because for now, of course, the market value in the first updates of the season will take good note of the performances and how the team evolves overall. But now when we will reach the last update of the season, it's time for great overall of things, and seeing that this player could now reach the Champions League scene, and we'll see, depending on what is the call for the national team with France, there could be some more reasons to get one further increase. So it's and at least see where we stand also in like the more global goalkeeper hierarchy worldwide, because I think with 25 million, he's starting to probably knock on the door of the top 10 or something like that. So we'll see how we can evolve in the next year, because he's still quite young, 21. He will get 22 near the end of the year. So he has a lot in front of him still.
Yeah, absolutely. He's obviously the second most valuable player at Lens. And as you said, I just quickly checking there, he's currently 13th in the world for most valuable goalkeepers, about 20 million euros less than Donnarumma, who is our most valuable player, between the sticks on Transfermarkt. But moving on to some other players at Lens who are doing very well. And one player who's maybe helped Risser this season in more than one occasion is, of course, Samson Baidoo, who is the 22-year-old central defender that Lens signed from Salzburg for another extremely small fee, Rono, 8 million euros. His market value has increased by 17 million euros to 25 million euros, his current market value. Much like Risser, he's also among the biggest market value growers or players who've gained the most market value this season. He's 15th amongst all players in Ligue 1, but only two central defenders in the French top flight have gained more market value than him this season. We're talking about a player here, Rona, who's came from Austria, and as far as I can tell, who's settled into Ligue 1 very, very well.
Yes, a bit like Risser, it's kind of a bargain, even if in 8 million doesn't seem like bargain, but in type of modern football fees, it's still quite a great pick from a really promising team. Like we always know the type of talents that Red Bull Salzburg can build. So he really adapted quite fast to Liga indeed. Like the defense of Lens is one of their main assets this season with Risser and Baidoo and a few others that really build the stability and solidity of this team. And of course, he had a bit of more known potential, like 8 million in the Austrian first division. Is still quite a nice statement for young players, but of course now we know that he can evolve on a bigger scene. Even if his 2026 year has been a bit more difficult because he had a few hamstring issues, and actually he was starting to train again with Lens, but the medical department of the team told the coach that he would need to back off of playing actual games for a few more weeks in fear of some relapses. So he just started playing in a few last couple of weeks. So he maybe lost a bit of momentum compared to some teammates, but I think the overall view of his 25-26 season is still promising enough and rewarding enough to see him get this type of upgrades through the season, and I'm sure attract some foreign highs also, I suppose, in Premier League. But I was checking the rumors that were linked to his name. We also had teams like Inter Milan, Juventus, Borussia Dortmund who had highs on him also. So it's really big names of the European scene who could have interest in Baidoo. But also, like Risser, it's still recent signings. They both have contracts until 2030. So if they have to go this summer, Lens will not back down for bargaining fees. They will probably go for, I don't know, 30, 40 million euros limit to try to negotiate and not sell them for less than they're worth in a way.
Yeah, I would suspect Dortmund are well aware of him since they're no strangers to picking up players from Salzburg. Famously picked up a young striker by the name of Erling Haaland. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of him. I don't know how he's doing these days, but he did very well at Dortmund. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I was just checking there as well. Inter Milan, Juventus, Borussia Dortmund on the rumour mill, and intriguingly Manchester City and Liverpool as well. Liverpool, of course, already have a very exciting young Ligue 1 defender heading to the club this summer. But do you think, as you mentioned there, he has had his injury concerns. This is his first season in French football, but there's a prospect of playing Champions League next season, or he could potentially move on to Serie A, Premier League, Bundesliga. Do you think he's ready to already make the next step, or would you prefer to see him stay at Lens next season?
I would say maybe compared to a few others of main Lens assets, I think this is a type of player that would probably benefit for this confirmation season that would be 26-27 by staying in Lens and probably be one of the main players of the team in the biggest competition. But of course, we know how the market is, and Lens has often attracted a few big names around them, like we saw in past seasons, players like Kusanov or Kevin Danso, another Austrian central defender, go for Premier League clubs. So depending on what would be best for the player in quotation marks and what the market will dictate, I think it will be tough to judge. But I think for his development, it's a type of player that will quite benefit for a fuller season. Again in Ligue 1 and with now European competitions on the horizon to build up even more. Because if we look at his profile, for example, he didn't make any appearance. He only made one appearances, and it was 2 years ago with the Austrian national team. So he's not even too much on the radar for this team, for example. So he still has some aspects to build up, to get even more exposure and be more recognized in the scene.
Absolutely. Maybe still a work in progress for sure at Lens. Final player on our list, last but certainly not least, is Mamadou Sangare, the central midfielder. Another new signing, Rono, some outstanding, possibly the best transfer window in all French football, it would seem, considering they picked up these three players. They signed him for Rapid Vienna for 8 million euros before the season started. And his market value has risen by 24 million euros, to 30 million euros. And he's arguably been the biggest star at Lens based on market value increases. He's 8th in Ligue 1 for the highest market value rises since the start of the season. Intriguingly, Rono, the third highest among all central midfielders, and only 2 central midfielders in Ligue 1 have picked up more market value this season, and that is Neves and Mayulu at PSG. Am I okay to say that outside of PSG, he's perhaps been the most impressive central midfielder in Ligue 1 this season?
Yeah, I think that's the right thing to say. Like when we see this type of rises to be like on par with players of PSG who get much more margin to progress in terms of value, I think it's a testimony to how much the player has achieved. I won't say a similar situation as Baidoo, but like he joined from an Austrian team for 8 million, I think it was the same fee, and he adapted quite well, quite fast also to the team. Directly became like a main asset in the midfield of the team. He contributed to goals, like as a central midfielder. It's quite a great stat to have like 3 goals, 4 assists, and it being in some recent games, like even last Friday against Brest, he contributed 1 assist. In the past months, he contributed also 2 goals and 1 assist. So he's been reliable, and not just in building play, but also being more forward in some games. So it's really quite a promising and exciting players to follow. He's been an international for the Mali national team also, like he's been in the previous AFCON when they reached quarterfinals. So he really progressed this season to show how he's worth and the potential he has. And compared to the 2 players we mentioned before, I think if Lens had to set selling price beforehand to each of these players, I think it would be the one of the 3 that would get the biggest price tag to start with, probably aiming close for maybe 50 million, something like that, because he's probably attracting mainly Premier League teams again. But yeah, it's I think even before joining Lens, he had attracted a few other teams, even a bit bigger than Lens, because Lens didn't have European competitions to attract them, but he still joined them, and now it's making it worth their money. And probably some clubs will now regret to not have spent only 8 millions a few months ago, and now having to pay the bigger fee to Lens to make it work. But and a bit like Risser and Baidoo, it's the same situation, contract until 2030. So really, it won't be it will be a hard fight to try to sign him this summer if some clubs want to aim for Mamadou Sangare.
Yeah, absolutely. Since he joined Lens, he's been linked with a move to Manchester United, Tottenham, West Ham, and Chelsea. And as we discussed the last time you were on the podcast, Premier League clubs are obviously very happy to depart with their cash when it comes to Ligue 1 talents. So we'll be really interested to see what happens to Sangare this summer. But before we let you go, Rono, I have to ask, the kind of theme with all three of these players, of course, is that they are new signings. And for anyone who maybe doesn't follow French football, is this typical of Lens to be very good at identifying and scouting young players in the transfer window, or is this just something new and exactly why they've been able to kind of project themselves towards a potential title challenge in Ligue 1? Is it, I'm not sure what the French expression would be, but a flash in the pan, or is it just a kind of one-off example, or is this typical of Lens to be very good at signing and scouting young players?
I would say yes and no, because we've seen in the past they reached Champions League a few seasons ago, and they had built quite promising teams with players from, I would say, smaller fees, who then went on for bigger prospects. I would name guys like Kevin Danso. There is also Lois Openda, who is a great striker, or they got back in France Brice Samba, players like that who really managed to bring the team forward, and coming from rather smaller fees and exiting on bigger fees. But last season they changed a bit everything in their both in coaching department, with the exit of Franck Hez, who has since coached Nice and now Rennes. And they had gone for a Spanish sporting director who brought a bunch of new assets, and again, not really expensive players, but it didn't work out for much of these players who already left last summer. So this time it was only like a one and done, because the team didn't qualify again for European competitions. And so they changed coach again. It was Will still last season, and they went for Pierre Sage, who had been really promising with Lyon a few months before. And it really clicked this season with Pierre Sage and the players that have been brought by the new sporting director, which name is Jean-Louis Leca, who is a former Ligue 1 goalkeeper who has a lot of experience with this type of clubs. And so I think they again found a better formula to make things work, like signing promising players. We talk about Risser, Baidoo, Sangare, but also bringing some more experienced one. We've seen Hudson Edouard, Florian Thauvin, who won the World Cup with France a few years ago, or player like Alan Saint-Maximin, who joined last winter. So it's really well thought, mixed of high and young prospects and more experienced players who really need to build their hype back up, or get one last exciting project, because in a way Lens is quite a historical team in France also. So it's a nice project to join, especially when they needed to rebuild like this season to a higher standard that they have known for the past previous seasons. So I think I hope for Lens that it becomes kind of the norm to spot young talents, mainly from abroad so far. Like we've got Sangare, Baidoo, Kusanov a few seasons ago. Like not many European clubs would have gone for Uzbek central defender in the Belarus league and then sell him for more than 30 millions 1 year and a half later. So I think that they've got the good methods. Of course, the transfer market sometimes has its reasons that make things work or not, depending on a few little details. But I think they probably got one of the best systems for now in France, Lens. And I'm kind of looking forward to the next transfer window in the summer to see how much they're willing to sell from their current assets, or if they want to I wouldn't say block them in the team, but see if some players will be willing to stay in the club to see how the team will evolve in the Champions League season and probably aim for one more podium next season, maybe, or if they will need again to scout the transfer market to get even more promising prospects.
Yeah, be very interesting. As you mentioned, Kusanov, a former player at Lens, doing very, very well in the Premier League. Perhaps a good sign of things to come if anyone does want to pick up any of these prospects for the Premier League next season. But Ronald, that's all the time we have. As always, it's a pleasure having you on the show. And if they can do the unexpected and win Ligue 1, then we'll definitely have to have you back on the show in the next couple of weeks. But for now, thank you so much, and I'll speak to you soon.
You're welcome.
And I'm now joined by our Italy expert, Marius Seuke. Marius, how's it going?
Hey, how are you doing? I'm really good. The season is coming to an end. It's all very exciting, and my club just managed to to gain enough points to stay in the league for sure. So I'm.
Where's the beer? I don't see any beer here, Marius. If this was my club, you wouldn't get me on a recording anytime soon.
And I mean, full transparency. You just got up like it's in the morning at your end, and I actually already finished my shift, so I could have one.
What is it, after 5 p.m.? You're allowed to have a beer. So yeah, it's not quite for me. It's not even 9 a.m. yet here. But we're not talking about Parma, although that could be a good topic for another podcast. We're talking about, but we're going to stay in Italy. We're going to talk about Kenan Yildiz, the Juve forward, who I think had a phenomenal development since he arrived in Italy from Bayern Munich's U19 in 2022. One of the biggest stars in Italian football, I would say, right? Of course, he represents Turkey. That means the eyeballs of an entire country are on you. He is a national team player for his country as well. Plays in an attacking role. His numbers are pretty decent, 11 goals and 10 assists in 44 games across all competitions. Then this season, 10 goals and 7 assists in Serie A. I think when you look back, how have you seen his development with Juventus?
When he would have been in the Bundesliga or La Liga, you would have probably said, yeah, you would have expected him to have this kind of meteoric rise. I mean, he's now since March, he's the second most valuable player in Serie A. Not because he got because an upgrade, but because Alessandro Bastoni got a downgrade. But anyway, he's number 2 now, and I think in the league that is more keen on talent development than Serie A is most of the time. Like I said, you would have expected him to have this development because when he played at the youth level at Bayern Munich, he was already like this great diamond that you just had to get out of the youth system and put in your team, and then he would do the things he can do, it's not always the case in Italy that talents at a very young age get the chance to play and play regularly. But when he had a season in Primavera for Juventus, then he should have played in Serie C in the third league for the second Juventus team. But they had some injury issues, and Massimiliano Allegri, the coach at the time, promoted him to the senior team, and the times he gave him the chance, you could already see, okay, this is someone special, he really has the technical ability and this like X factor that he can make a difference even at this young age. And since then he's it's just like a rocket rising. He's got the number 10 now, the famous Alessandro Del Piero number. He got the the big contract extension in February. He's now one of the best earners in the club. And he's got the most scorer points. He's vice captain, and he's definitely the most important player in the Juventus attack.
I know people at Bayern Munich, and he's the player that is often mentioned to me as the one that got away, right? And I think lots has been written about the fact that he not only got away from Bayern Munich, but also Germany's national team. It happens, talent falls through and gets missed. And in his case, I think for Bayern Munich, a really costly mistake, because when you look at his market value development now, 75 million euros. Remember when Bayern Munich were looking for a left winger and then spent lots of money on Luis Diaz, and yet that worked out, but 75 million euros is Kenan Yildiz's market value now. They could have saved themselves all that money.
And absolutely. And it's always the discussion at Bayern, or it was until Musiala and Lennart Kahl broke through into the team, that where are the new players from the youth, from the Bayern Munich youth? And he would have been there, of course.
So he arrives at Juventus, he makes the first team. We quickly gave him a market value of 10 million euros as an 18-year-old. That's quite high. Then he jumps to 30 million euros this is in November 2024. Stays there for a while. Then in October 2024, he goes to 40. In December, he goes to 45. Then in June 2025, he goes to 50 million euros. And then finally, in October 2025, so this was the fall update, he hits the 75 million euros, and he got that market value confirmed in December. And then, of course, we had only had a small update in the spring, right? And we're going to have a big update before the World Cup. But that is quite the rise in market value. You don't really see that often, and especially in Serie A, as you mentioned, with Italian players, or with young players that come through the academy. Of course, in his case, he's not Italian, but it's not something that we've seen a lot in recent years.
Yeah, I will have to think about who you could compare. Maybe it is Alessandro Bastoni, who is a defender, of course. He had a similar rise, and Nico Pass now is on a bit of a lower level, but the graph looks similar. Yeah, he could be someone, but if you'll get to the likes of the 75 million or even higher, we'll have to see next year. This will definitely not be something to discuss this summer. But I think it could have been even faster. He was kind of held back by the development the Juventus team was taking as in the large picture and the bigger picture, because they had they had to change coaches several times, and there was not a lot of consistency in the development of the tactics. They had, under Max Allegri, he's always this this classic Italian approach coach with a solid defense, and we have some stars up front, and they will manage to score a goal, and that's enough. Igor Tudor, I mean, he's better than the things he showed at Tottenham, of course, but but he was there only for half a year in the end, and they all didn't really manage to have like a real good functioning attack. And Kenan Yildiz this season, when Luciano Spalletti, who is able to form this team that can play beautiful football and can score a lot of goals, but he took over in the middle of the season, and he is also like kind of adjusting to be a Juventus coach. He took the defense into the focus to get into the Champions League ranks, and Kenan Yildiz, he was kind of alone much of the time, and they gave him the ball, and he should do something good with it. And he was able to do that a lot of times. You mentioned his numbers. There's, I think, only 3 players who scored more goals. There's only 3 players who provided more assists in the league. But he's still young, and he cannot like shoulder all the pressure on his own. And I think if he would have had a brilliantly working team at his side, he might even be higher now.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, you look at this Juventus team, it's not the Juventus of 4 or 5 years ago. It's not, the all-conquering Serie A champions. Then they will slip into Champions League football, it looks like, when you look at the 3 head points ahead of Como. So not even that is secured, right? So yeah, still some work to do for them. I mean, the outlook then is with Kenan Yildiz. You already mentioned it, that there is a feeling that he hasn't reached his ceiling. He's the second most valuable Turkish national team player after Arda Güler, right? You have the sense there is more there. And the question, I guess, is, and I mean, this is the big thing that's looming this summer, is he's going to represent Turkey at the World Cup. They're going to have Australia, Paraguay, and the United States in the group. Because of the way the World Cup is structured, we suspect that, they'd probably be good enough to be one of those 3rd place teams, at least, probably better, to sneak through to the next round. So we'll see. I mean, if they have a run at the World Cup, you would suspect that would open up a lot of avenues for Kenan Yildiz to explore a path where, if he says, well, this is as much as I can develop at Juventus, my market value is not necessarily going to be much more, where teams are going to say, well, this is a guy we maybe want in our team.
I think the rumors, they have already been there in the winter, because of course you can think there's this like really, really talented player, and at Juventus he might not even play in Champions League next year, and they went out of the Champions League like in a real dismal way against Galatasaray. And of course there were suggestions she could leave for one of the big Spanish clubs or for the Premier League. But then they still managed to get his contract extended to 2030, and gave him the big rise, gave him the confidence as a vice captain. And I think he, from the, of course, a player in the media, what he will say and what he will do in the end, it can sometimes be different. But there is a feeling that he knows what he's got there, like like he's the big star of the team right now, and if he went to Arsenal or Liverpool, he would be one among many again. And I think, of course, when they are playing a brilliant World Cup, he scores 5, and they go to the semi-final, and then the big offer for more than 100 million euros comes. Juventus won't say no, and he won't say no. I think there's no doubt about that. But if everything goes like in the normal way, then there might still be interest, but maybe not like this big offer that Juventus cannot decline.
I know Juve haven't been great in the last couple of years, but still Juventus. You know what I mean? There's not that many teams that you could potentially say, okay, well, as you said, it has to be a big offer, but where do you go from Juventus? It's really either one of the very top Premier League teams, and I'm talking very top Premier League teams. There's really a 1 or 2 in mind, and I don't know if they really have the need to sign him, or it's either Barcelona or Real Madrid, isn't it? I mean, that is really what we're talking about here at this stage. and do they have the need? Because it's not like you're not gonna make good money at Juventus, quite the opposite. So it is really fascinating to see where he develops. I'm a big fan. I every time I get to write the market value updates for Serie A, I always like to ask about Kenan Yildiz. I think he's a really interesting player. He's one that, despite everything, and especially because he's Turkish, still kind of flies a little bit under the radar. And until you watch him and you're like, wow, there's something really special here. So that's kind of where I am at. If you have, and this is completely speculative, we don't have those market values in our system. We haven't even discussed them yet. But what do you think his ceiling is in terms of market value? And again, this is an opinion.
Yeah, I think he definitely can reach the big 100. He's 20 now, so we are talking still a talent in development. And we'll see how much he can reach at Juventus. I think there is also the possibility there to get a market value of 100 million or more. Probably or not as high as the big stars at Real Madrid and Man City and such, but on the next level, probably. This is something that he could achieve at Juventus if he gets them to win the Scudetto, and then even gets higher numbers, which is something they will be aiming for next year with Spalletti having a full preseason with the team, and they will put a bit more focus on attack next year probably. And if he gets 40 goals and assists, and they win something, then there's definitely the possibility to get over the 100. I can't confirm it, nor can I rule out that he will be at 100 million after the World Cup, but it's definitely possible, I think.
Keep watching him, and as always, check out our Serie A site. Check out, of course, all the great content that we do around Serie A as well. And you can find all the market value and the stats and Kenan Yildiz stats on our site. Marius, this was great. Thanks, as always, for joining me. And we'll get to talk about Parma soon. Don't worry.
All right. Thank you for having me again.
We are now clearly at the business end of the Premier League season, and that was made evident by the fact that we now have two teams that have already been confirmed as relegated towards the Championship. We already know which club will be coming up from the Championship to the Premier League in Coventry City, and we still have an enticing title race at the top of the table as well. And as such, we've got Ben Littlmore back on the show this week to discuss 5 players that could see their market value increase significantly in the next market value update. The next Premier League market value update, will be on June 3rd. So at the end of the season and just before the World Cup kicks into action. Ben, before we jump into these 5 players, how are you? Hope you're doing well. And why don't you just kind of briefly explain to listeners how this period works for Transfermarkt as we look ahead to the next market value update?
Yeah, so hi Stefan. So we have 2 big updates throughout the season, one around December and one around June, and then we have the intermediate updates around March and in October. And as we always say, after the updates is before the updates, because as soon as that last update goes live, which was on the 9th of March, we're already thinking ahead to the next update, which, as you said, will take place on June the 3rd. Now, at this stage, of course, nothing's finalised because there's a lot of football to be played between now and then. But the main areas we look at in this update is, one, getting ready for the summer transfer window. So if there's big rumours about players and we know roughly what fees they might be looking at going for, we take that into account around this update. We also, obviously, these games coming up are big games and they do make a big stand to players' profiles. So when you're looking at the business end of the Champions League, winning the Premier League, winning the FA Cup, these are the games that do change a player's status. And if teams can look at that player standing up on these big occasions, it does inevitably put more value on them. Another thing we also look at is age downgrades in these full updates. So you'll see a lot of players, even if they're playing well, that are coming towards the end of their careers, 29 plus, they'll start falling down. But as I said, nothing is finalised at this point. And I would encourage users listening to this that want to get involved and want to have their say. I know it divides a lot of opinions, then they can. So by doing that, if you go to the Transfermarkt website, if you go to forum at the top, you'll then see market value discussion. And you can go on there, and any player you want, you can say what value that you think they should be, whether they should go down, whether they should go up, and you can explain your reasons why. And we'll have that debate, and that debate is then taken into account when we go into our meetings at this stage of the season coming up in the next month or so, when we start making those decisions. You can also, on every player's profile on the website, you can vote whether you think they should go up, down, or stay the same. And these, again, are statistics that we look at when we go into these big discussions, when we get our spreadsheets out and we start looking at things towards the end of that update.
Yeah, it's always a very grueling meeting when we do sit down to discuss the final numbers on that, for sure. And yeah, absolutely, head to the Market Value Forum. A lot of discussion in there over all sorts of players. It's worth saying this is a forum for users across the world. We automatically translate into your local language for when people make comments. So you'll be discussing this not just with, Chelsea fans in the Chelsea forum or Arsenal fans on the Arsenal forum. It is users around the world to kind of level out the playing field there and offer some unbiased views as well. But let's get straight into this, Ben. The first player on the list, maybe not a surprise, someone we actually spoke about on last week's show following the back of Man City's win over Arsenal. And that's, of course, Rayan Cherki, who has a market value of 65 million euros. How's he looking ahead of this next market value update?
Yeah, I mean, no spoilers, but I can guarantee you he will be going up in some form. I mean, we haven't decided exactly what the figure will be yet, but he certainly will be going up. I mean, he arrived in the summer. A lot of people thought it was a bargain fee of 36 million euros, but there was question marks about his attitude, whether it would work under Pep, whether it would work in the physicality of the Premier League. And lately, he has proven that he can answer all of those questions. And I mean, he's been starting games. His numbers since the last update aren't actually that incredible when you isolate them. It's 9 games, 1 goal, 3 assists, but it's the calibre of his performances. He was man of the match in the EFL Cup final, arguably, against Arsenal. You could say the same in the Premier League game against Arsenal, which could win them the title. He scored that amazing goal. He's a proper throwback in terms of he's not robotic. He's breaking teams down, and he's probably arguably the best player to watch in the Premier League right now. Now, the fact that he's delivering in these big games, he is likely to get a huge increase when we look at it in line with the other players that are having this sort of impact. Only Bruno Fernandes has more assists in the Premier League this season, and it's his first time, and he's also got age on his side as well. He's still young. So for sure he will be going up, and it's just a question of how much buy, really. And again, if you want to have your say on Cherki, how much you think it should be worth, should he be worth 100 million euros, 80 million euros, head to the forum and have your say, because it's going to be a tough one for us to decide. So yeah, he's one that he's definitely going up, but we're not too sure exactly how much just yet. And it will depend on these next few games.
Yeah, absolutely. Social media is awash with people saying it's incredible how Man City managed to pick him up for such a bargain. And as a France international, he obviously could have a very exciting World Cup as well. So it seems like the sky's the limit for him. Another player similar in terms of potential, in terms of age, is Igor Thiago, the Brentford striker. Ben, this isn't really his debut season in the Premier League. Obviously, he did join last year, but unfortunately an injury ruled him out for most of it. So this is the first time we're really getting a good look at the Brazilian centre-forward. And performances this year, I've already seen his market value increase to 50 million euros, but I think I'm okay in saying that number's probably going to increase before the end of the season.
Again, it's almost definitely his value will go up. Again, we don't know how much. I mean, Igor Thiago, nobody expected this. Nobody was talking about him because, like you say, it's not his debut season, but it kind of is, because he didn't play any football last season. He came with a decent reputation from Club Brugge. He was meant to be the Ivan Toney replacement, and we didn't see any of that. And obviously, coming back from an injury to then adapt to the Premier League for the first time, nobody really expected much. We all at least thought it would take time, and he's just hit the ground running. I mean, the amount of goals to be behind only Erling Haaland in the goal scoring charts whilst playing for a mid-table team at the moment in Brentford is incredible. And we also, from our Brazilian colleagues, we expect him to maybe even start the World Cup, not just go, but start. He's now scored for Brazil as well. He sort of, players often go on that burst of goals, and you think, is this going to come to an end, that purple patch, and it's going to slow down? And he's proved that he just keeps going again. And he's scored, I think, 5 in his last 5 games since the last update. So he is one for sure that's going to go up. And then, obviously, we have another update after the World Cup. So he's likely to go up a substantial amount in this update as well, potentially with the interest of top Premier League clubs. Lots of teams are looking for strikers as well, and he's proven he can do it in the Prem. So yeah, another one that will be going up. And again, head to the forums, have your say at what that value should be.
Yeah, absolutely. I should say, and I have to give him a shout out here, Bart Townsend, our area manager in Belgium, was raving about Igor Thiago before he moved to the Premier League. And we did have some articles on him at the time explaining what kind of player he was and who Brentford were getting. So, a bit of a shout out for Bart, who's always on the ball with these things. And we had him on the show recently to discuss some exciting players in Belgium. So go back and listen to that if you haven't done so already. Moving on to another striker, or another forward, if you will, Ben, in Kripke Jr., who's at Bournemouth. An absolute steal. A player we're talking about here is signed from Bournemouth last year for, 13 million euros. Went back to Lorient, came back to Bournemouth this season, and how do we explain this guy? His market value has increased by 40 million euros, and I think I'm right in saying you may have done something on this recently in terms of under 19 players with goals centre forward. Maybe I just made that up, but his stats are just almost unparalleled at that age group, aren't they?
It's unbelievable. Bournemouth's record with their recruitment in the last few years has been incredible, and they've struck gold again here with Junior Kripke. He's got the most goals as a teenager in his first season in the Premier League since Robbie Keane in the late 90s. So
that's what I was thinking of, yeah.
Not many teenagers come to the Premier League and do what he's doing, and his ball striking ability and finishing is incredible. He needs no backlift, and from the edge of the box, he can just fire a ball into the top corner, and that's a skill that not many have. And because of his age, being 19, doing it in the Prem, he's already attracting plenty of interest. The latest rumours suggest that Man City want him. It's not like they've got many forwards anyway, so they probably need to add another one. There's also been rumours with Arsenal and other top clubs, so it looks like teams might look to strike early in the summer and bring him in. So yeah, what he's doing already at such a young age, he's currently at 40 million euros. Again, that's something that's going to increase, and again, we'll probably have a better idea of those rumours and the exact fee that Bournemouth might want in the next 3 or 4 weeks. So that will probably affect it. But yeah, I would say he's likely to get a substantial increase, and that the figure of that increase, will probably depend on those rumours and how likely it is he could move for a big fee this summer.
Yeah, really, really interesting player. Another player who potentially could be on the move this summer, although probably less likely than Junior Kripke, is, of course, Morgan Rogers, who's not the last player, the next player on this list. He has a market value of 80 million euros due to his fantastic performances for Aston Villa this season in particular. Maybe couldn't help them in that defeat to Fulham at the weekend, but we're talking about a player here, Ben, who has gone from strength to strength at Aston Villa, in many ways overshadowed some of their other players. And much like Cherki or Igor Thiago, has a clear run at a potential World Cup start for England. And, in that sense, the sky's the limit for him as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you could certainly make an argument that he's maybe the best player in the Premier League outside of the big 6 teams, which I know is a term that we probably need to use less and less at the moment. But Morgan Rogers was actually one of the players where there was the biggest debate around him in the previous update, because we were thinking of going even higher. He's currently at 80 million. But again, that was sort of one where we looked ahead and we knew we had another update before the window. Aston Villa look very likely to get Champions League football, which will obviously encourage him to stay. And I think if they hadn't got Champions League football, there was no way they're keeping him. They have had some issues with financial rules before as well, so they may look to cash in for that. And you would think if he was to go, I think Villa will be looking for around the 100 million euro mark, to be honest, considering what he's done and his ability. I mean, most games you watch Aston Villa, he's probably their best player on the pitch in terms of what he can do. Even against Fulham, he has that moment in the first half of the weekend where he runs through about 4 players and it just goes wide, but that is something out of nothing, and he has the ability to do that. We'll also be interested to see what sort of role he does play at the World Cup this summer. He has been starting under Tuchel, and Tuchel likes him when Bellingham comes back in. Will Bellingham then take that role? We don't know. But again, we have more time to react to that in the World Cup update after. So if he does start and shine for England, expect that figure to even go more north than it already is. But yeah, I think, again, there will be a small upgrade most likely for Rodgers, unless something happens between now and then, like maybe a serious injury or something. But again, he's a really hard one to figure down his exact fee, and that English tax as well will probably come into account.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's an interesting player, I think, because, and we've discussed this a few times over the last couple of weeks, a lot of those kind of big England players aren't exactly ending the season on the best of form, except, and as such, Rodgers maybe stands out in that regard as a player who is absolutely in form, and maybe something Thomas Tuchel has taken note of. Another England player who has been performing though this season, and the final player on this list is Elliot Anderson, who obviously a Nottingham Forest midfielder with a €60 million market value at this moment in time. Ben, I'm still heartbroken that he never chose to play for Scotland. I was trying my best to kind of push that campaign before, he kind of rose to prominence, because I think it's probably fair to say when he did make that €41 million move from Newcastle to Nottingham Forest, people thought, this is just clubs kind of playing with the PSR rulings. It's not really about his talent or his potential. But I mean, that now looks like something of a steal, despite the fact that it was such a sizable transfer fee, 18 months ago?
Absolutely. So at the time, he moved for €41 million. His market value at that time was just €15 million. And he'd only played just over 1,000 minutes in the Premier League. We hadn't seen much of him in a Newcastle shirt. The prospect was there and he looked exciting at times, but he wasn't starting games regularly and wasn't having the sort of impacts. And like you say, with I think the goalkeeper Vlachodimos went the other way for €23 million. And it did reek of one of those PSR deals that was happening a lot of that time where, teams are trying to get the profits up. But I mean, 41 million now looks an absolute steal. It really does. He's now at 60 million euros, and that fee will go up. It's whether it's how much, because the interests. I mean, recent reports suggest that Evangelos Marinakis, the flamboyant Forest owner, wants about 140 million euros for him. Now, a club's not going to pay that. He's not going to go for 25 million more than Declan Rice did. I do think there's a chance they can get around 100 million euros. There's plenty of interest there. The latest reports suggest Man City are doing everything they can to try and persuade him to come. With Man United also very interested. We know Man United are in the market for at least probably 2 central midfielders this summer. So there's plenty of interest there. Again, good chance he starts for England alongside Declan Rice. So that's another one similar to sort of Krupi Jr. and Igor Thiago, where we'll be keeping an eye on those sort of reliable rumours and the fees that are being associated with him towards the end of the season and how he performs, and that will affect the value of trying to sort of predict what he could go for this summer if he does, as expected, probably move on from Forest.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'd be really interesting to see if the likes of Man United or Man City maybe try and make a move before the World Cup. We often see this in these World Cup years where sometimes business does get done beforehand so that, these players don't have their market values inflated due to World Cup performances. It shouldn't matter how they play in like 5 or 6 games at a World Cup, but everyone listening to this show will be able to think of one example of a player moving on to, one of Europe's biggest clubs off the back of some performances, and maybe Elliot Anderson might do that for England. So maybe your likes of Man City or Man United might think, let's just pay the €100 million now, get out of the way in case he obviously goes on to do something remarkable in North America this summer, sorry. But Ben, that's all the list. That's all the players I want to talk about this week's show. But before I let you go, why don't you once again remind people how they can help and have their say on how these market values might change before the Premier League update, which will be on June 3rd.
Yeah, so we've given 5 examples there of players that could go up. Of course, there'll be loads more that go up. There'll be loads more that go down. Nothing's finalised yet. We sort of go into that period now where we start deciding. We start looking across the forum in detail at what our users are saying. We have a look at the voting tool, and then we come together with our international colleagues and we start having those discussions. So yeah, if you want to get involved, you might think that Igor Thiago is worth 80 million. You might think that somebody else you might think Bukayo Saka's nowhere near worth 120. All you need to do is go to the Transfermarkt homepage and you hit forum at the top, and then you click market value discussion. And on there, you can just search a player, and then you can open a debate, or you can add to a debate and add what figure you think they should be worth. You will need a Transfermarkt user account, but if you haven't already got one, it's easy to make it on there. It'll be easy for you just to create one in the top right corner. And then you can have your say, and instead of just moaning at us about them all being wrong, you can actually do something about it. So head to the forum and have your say. And June the 3rd, we'll see the big updates, and there's going to be some big changes.
Yeah, and of course, be nice and polite, because if you're too rude, Ben or I will have to come along with the ban hammer and ban you from the forum, which is never fun. But Ben, thanks again for coming on the show. I'm sure you'll be on in the coming weeks. As I said, there's a lot going on in the Premier League right now, and certainly leading up to the market value update in early June. But for now, I'll let you go, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much. Cheers.